some people are perfectly happy to ride a stronger horse because they think it's going to get them to their destination. Now,
what stronger horses are you alluding to?
Well, for instance, I mean, we've had this for years in Europe. Look, by the late 1990s, the radical left, for instance, was stuck to a few people meeting in an upstairs room of a pub with a dog.
Douglas just said that we're up against religion. Religion's making a comeback. But in the grand sweeping kind of arc of the challenges that we currently face, it ain't just religion that's the only source of unreason. You have personal experience of another sort of orthodoxy and dogma. Can you expand this conversation from religion specifically to other ways in which groupthink and tribalism are posing a threat to Enlightenment values?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it. I was sitting here thinking this is amazing that we're talking about why the Enlightenment is on the ropes and the only thing on the table is the Islamic threat to the Enlightenment, when in fact there's this whole other part of it that in the West is quite live, especially within the academy, where people have begun to feel sophisticated, arguing against the mechanisms of the Enlightenment, the scientific method itself, the values of the Enlightenment, and you don't really imagine that people you could imagine that people are a little bit deaf to what those values are and how they work, but it's a little hard to imagine that people would actually explicitly argue against them until you've faced it, and I have faced it. I've brought up the Enlightenment and said these values needed protecting, and I've been told that actually that's the problem. So I think we have to disentangle a couple of things here in order to see what's going on. The Enlightenment, by largely an accident of history, is a European phenomenon. And there are a lot of folks who are looking at the world and noting that it appears to be rigged in a particular way that preserves a kind of power that is resident in Europe and amongst people of European descent elsewhere, like Australia, the US, etc. And they are not phrasing their argument particularly well, nor do I think the argument is very strong, but the argument is something like, you're telling us, the world, that the Enlightenment is the path forward, and it just so happens that you, in the European-derived West, are ahead in the use of these tools, which you claim are the route to discovering the truth of how the universe works. So are you really telling us that it just so happens that the way forward for all of us is a way in which you are all ahead? That sounds like bullshit to us, right? That sounds like you deciding that it just so happens we're going to settle military matters from now on with basketball. Oh, really? Basketball? That's the game you're going to choose to settle it? It's not going to be soccer or something like that? It's going to be basketball? So the thing that I think we have to notice is that there is truth in the part of this that says that, yes, the power that derives from Enlightenment values is not evenly distributed across the globe. But the question is, are we really supposed to reject the power of the Enlightenment, or are we supposed to democratize the power of the Enlightenment? I think democratizing the power of the Enlightenment is a slam dunk. And I would point out, actually, I feel in a good position to say this because although I am of European descent, I'm also Jewish, and the Enlightenment was not a Jewish phenomenon. But I'm going to wield those tools like a broadsword because they're the best tools. They don't come from my ancestors, but they are useful to me, and they will be useful to my descendants. And anybody who wishes to be powerful on Earth by virtue of understanding how things actually function should level up through the acquisition and enhancement of this particular toolkit. So that's really, I think, the battle we're in. Are we supposed to reject the toolkit in order to level the playing field, or are we supposed to bring everybody on board with the toolkit so that everybody has access to these most powerful tools for discovering how things function?
Now, wouldn't the social justice warriors who hounded you out of a job say that they actually are on the side of the Enlightenment, and that the evolution of greater egalitarianism and participation for all people, whatever their gender or race, is a trajectory that they're defending?
I would have thought that that's what they would say, but they literally said the opposite. And it's honestly the most stunning thing to face people who would stare down the Enlightenment and claim that, in fact, it's a kind of fraud, that really the whole idea that the Enlightenment is a key to insight is a rationalization for the naked wielding of power, that it's not really insight at all, that the arguments that are powerful in science are really just power arguments. They're not arguments about truth or mechanism or anything like that. So, yeah, before I had these conversations myself, I would have said exactly what you conjectured. But
I want to
having
confirm
had
that.
them,
They have jumped the shark.
Yeah.
So just recently, about a month ago in the UK, there was a clickbait TV interview between Piers Morgan and somebody whose name I can't remember. But Piers was criticizing her for her support of the hijacking of the left-wing movement in the UK and strawmanned her. Piers Morgan said, well, you know, it was over immigration, and he said, well, your hero, Obama, did so and so and so and so under his presidency. And she responded with these very words. She said, Obama's not my hero. I'm literally a communist, you idiot. Now, what happened next was the clip went viral. People started cheering as if that was a great response, that she shut up Piers Morgan, who is in need of shutting up on many an occasion, but not by proudly announcing you're a communist. Now, that's what's happened, right? So they've jumped the shark. She didn't try and argue a defense of Enlightenment values against his position, and taken a pro-immigration position from an egalitarian perspective. She basically ditched all of that, said she was a communist. What happened next fascinated me even more. There's a magazine, what was it? What's that magazine she was featured in? It was
Teen Vogue.
One
Some of you may have missed it.
Or was it Ella magazine?
No, Teen Vogue. I assure you, I bought both.
Right.
It's a fine intellectual quarterly.
Douglas reads them in the sauna. But it said, and it was headlined, you know, something along the lines of, just so I'm not, you know, defaming anyone, because of course I just won a great defamation case, 3.4 million, thank you. It was it said something along the lines of, hero who shut up Piers Morgan, by quipping that she is literally a communist, as if that was a good thing. And that magazine was printed in D.C. The journalist who wrote it was in Washington, D.C.
The moral frivolity of deciding to forget the gulag in order to win a point of Piers frigging Morgan is a real disgrace. Anyhow, but look, where to... Just one other thought very quickly to back up what Bret just said. I mean, look, there are people on college campuses now in the US. There was one again recently, described facts as European-centric, as an idea. They're like, facts are like something we've got to fight against because of where they come from, I mean, and their oppressive nature.
The funny thing is that the guy who says that the most is the President of the United States, who that person probably doesn't like very much.
Yeah, but they mirror each other in
yes.
many ways.
Eric, you know, you're a scientist. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, the whole thing's absolutely fascinating. To me, we've reached some point of decadence and exhaustion that we were not expecting. And I think we had thought that the Enlightenment was very well embedded in many of these societies, and we now find that, you know, it's sort of like down to a handful of people whose names we, you know, can reel off, who are willing to defend it in an environment where every time you stand up to defend this thing, you find yourself in a world of hurt. And we're not exactly up against the intellectual A-team either. So,
can you just unpack what you mean when you say that you stand up to defend it and you find yourself in a world of hurt?
Well, you know, if I say, you know, there was a tweet the other day from Planned Parenthood of Kentucky, which made a very interesting biological observation. I'm not sure if it was peer-reviewed or not, but it said, some men have a uterus 15 times. Some men have a uterus, I mean, because apparently things become more true as you perseverate.
It was peer-reviewed in Teen Vogue.
Well, yeah. And I think my response was, either you're referring to persistent Mullerian duct syndrome, in which case this is not how we discuss science, or you're just eating a box of multicolored crayons hoping to shit a rainbow. And I can't tell you how much you know what they meant. You know. So, no, I don't fully know what they mean. I think what you're telling me that they mean is that this would be a really good place to lie about things in a particular way that's kind. And I do think that that's important. There are load-bearing fictions. In America, it's very important, one man, one vote. But why is it that Wyoming has 2 senators and,
2 people.
What?
It's 2 people and 2 senators.
Yeah. Right. So like the whole thing is prima facie insane, right? If you think about it as contract bridge, the Enlightenment gets into trouble by extolling its own virtues, like one man, one vote, and all men are created equal, and then everything is honored in the breach. And so people who get really angry about these sort of hypocrisies get very, very angry. So let's define something called Enlightenment Plus. Like, you get the Enlightenment, which is all the good stuff, and then you get like the Dulles brothers and Kermit Roosevelt trying to destabilize Iran, and COINTELPRO in America assassinating Fred Hampton in his bed, and driving Jean Seberg to miscarry and commit suicide just because she was a supporter of radical black rights in the 60s. We've done a lot of bad things, and we've extolled these virtues in a way that many of us find absolutely exhausting. Now, what's interesting to me about Majid's description is that, and this is something I don't think we've discussed before, but Bret and my family had a spy sent against it in the 1950s by our government. And the response to that is not, okay, well, the Enlightenment's off. This is, we're going to declare a Jewish jihad from the left wing for this patently unethical behavior. Instead, it's this sense of, oh man, I'm going to use the Enlightenment and shove this shit down your throat. I'm going to make you so sick and so upset with yourself that you come to understand the pain that you've inflicted on others for, let's say, the McCarthy era, or the Tuskegee medical experiment, or all of these things that are absolutely sickening and disgusting.
So the key question... You just made the point. It's only by reference to the Enlightenment, the values of the Enlightenment, that those violations of the values are problematic and are evidence of hypocrisy.
Well, I think
you're holding yourself to the standard that is being violated. And this is being weaponized against Enlightenment cultures by people who don't share those values. So very, very cynically, I mean, it is analogous to the use of human shields. It's like the people who will use human shields know that the people they're fighting care about so-called collateral damage, and it's an asymmetric moral contest.
Yes, but I would say that when you have 1.6 billion people, you can afford all sorts of exotic strategies like sending suicide bombers. When you're down to your last 20 million or whatever it is that we Jews have, you're thinking like, hey, this Enlightenment looks like some pretty heavy weaponry. We should figure out how to wield it and take it away from the Scots, because I think this is our day, right? So I think it's very important to understand that there's a contract bridge element where you make a bid and then you fall short of the bid, and that embitters and angers people. But what I'm concerned about in this discussion is that somehow we're tired. We're just so exhausted. And you look at Islam, and man, Islam is muscular. Russia looks muscular. China looks muscular.
Well, that's the thing, is that anything looks muscular in the film.
Compare it, clearly. I mean, you have a photo online posted yesterday with your midriff showing. So.
Yeah. Hello, Sydney.
Yeah.
I think there's an important point to make here, which is that I think that there is a danger we have conversations at different paces. I do want to get this point out of the way so it's clear that when Douglas and I speak, and it became apparent when you brought the left in, which clearly we have that challenge with Corbyn's Labour Party in the UK as well, but the most pressing challenge we have in Europe is jihadism. And often when we speak, we're speaking to a reality in Europe. There's a lived experience. I walk down the streets especially when ISIS were in power, and I'm sure Douglas does as well, looking over my shoulder in case somebody's going to slit my throat.
I was told not to appear in public for a year by the police.
Yeah. So there's a danger that when we speak, we're speaking to a specific reality, but our words are going around the world, and that is in danger of being misinterpreted as an overemphasis on Islam, right? And so just a quick example. Muslims in America, when surveyed, are more pro-gay marriage than their Christian evangelical counterparts, when surveyed. Muslims in Britain, when surveyed, are 53% in favor of criminalizing being gay.
Now.
Now, this is the latest survey from 2016, right? And the one from America was from 2017. So when Douglas and I speak, we're speaking to a reality where 53% of my co-religionists want to ban his existence. Whereas in America, they're better than the Christians on that front. So just want to get that point clear, that there are slightly different realities. We're speaking to different emphases.
Crocodiles are nearer different boats.
And it's important to make that point, because when we speak to that specific reality, of course, our words don't stay in that reality. So we look as if we're overly focused on something when actually,
So you also just have to note that there's this weird confluence between these two things, which to this day I can't make much sense of, where the postmodern left, and we can argue whether or not postmodern is the right term, given that most of the people in the category don't know anything about postmodernism. They're just behaving in a postmodern fashion. But that they are embracing and rationalizing Islamic extremism is a very interesting fact. That among the things that they don't understand is the danger of this extreme ideology that's being deployed, that is itself so very intolerant of things like homosexuality. So there is at the core, and if you haven't run into it personally, it's worth having some conversation so that you can actually hear what the thought process sounds like. But this idea that there is no reality, that all arguments, no matter how mechanistic and backed by evidence, are really power in disguise, and therefore you can make any argument, and if it functions in a powerful way, then it's as true as anything else. Therefore, stigmatizing people for things that they're not guilty of is as valid a thing to do as anything else. That concept is very destructive and dangerous, and it is backing both the attack on the Enlightenment within the academy in the West and the rationalizing of extreme elements in Islam, both of which are truly dangerous.
But just trying to loop slightly back. What I was trying to get to about the Enlightenment plus. So all the good stuff of the Enlightenment plus like the dirty tricks and kind of the, we'll steal some land and take people's resources and lie about some elections and maybe assassinate some people in South America. All that kind of stuff. The whole point is to get rid of as much plus as possible. And I don't think it's possible to get rid of all of the Enlightenment plus stuff that doesn't actually make us feel good. I mean, I think it's very important to start dealing in adult-level fictions. If you're going to have a state is going to have to do bad things or it's not, I think it becomes self-extinguishing.
Yes.
And I think that for some reason, it's time to tell the kids that the tooth fairy is actually mom and dad. And that's very terrifying to people, right? We don't have one man, one vote. We don't actually have a perfect system of, the 12 people can figure out who's guilty and who's innocent. There's so much that just doesn't actually work. But it does work better.
It works okay.
And it works okay. And if we could be a little bit less childish about extolling the virtues of the Enlightenment, I think we could advance the Enlightenment a great deal more. Because I think the embittering and invidious aspect of this is, when we wax rhapsodic about the Enlightenment, like, well, I've accumulated all of this wealth only by virtue of my ability to work the Enlightenment, and somebody else says, well, you did take our resources. That is an extremely angering thing, and I think, if you watch the Jordanian pilot ISIS video, which I recommend that you do not do, but some of us have.
When they burn him alive.
Yeah, well, their point, which nobody seemed to register in the West, is you kill people in this exact way, through rubble when you destroy a building and through fire when your incendiary devices go off. And the entire point of this is we are simply going to do to you what you have done to us so that you will experience something.
Which has a theological backing as well.
Yeah. And
also in the Old Testament.
Right, and so it's this thing that happens, you get to this fork in the road, which is, are we going to do the plus stuff, the Enlightenment plus stuff back to you? Or are we going to take a higher road and create something where we will be elevated above our oppressors? And I think that, the Islamic impulse too often has been, we're going to do the bad stuff right back and worse. And it would be more positive if people saw that you could work the Enlightenment to create new wealth, new possibilities. And I'm concerned that when you asked about the science, there is an extent to which the great scientific discoveries have slowed. Like the 20th century was pretty horrible in terms of war and conflict, but it was absolutely astounding in terms of scientific change and understanding. And it has not kept that pace in recent years, and I think it's unlikely to keep that pace in most fields. And so we have to understand that it's going to be harder to create new wealths for some reasons I can go into, I don't want to right now, and it's going to be harder to get that kind of golden era. So there is a fear that you've missed out on the golden age of the Enlightenment, and now you're just carrying the super heavy backpack around, and you're not quite sure whether you're going to get enough out of it to make it worthwhile and allow you to catch up.
I mean, there's this other alternative that lingers in the background on all of this, which is that Enlightenment plus Enlightenment as it is, it's all a bit passé, and there's a lot of people who say all of the things you just highlighted and more, inequality and so on, and who say, I've got another system. I've got another system of my own. That's what a lot of the people you cite, you say, why these weird cohabitations that occur? Well, that's easy. I mean, some people are perfectly happy to ride a stronger horse because they think it's going to get them to their destination. Now,
what stronger horses are you alluding to?
Well, for instance, I mean, we've had this for years in Europe. Look, by the late 1990s, the radical left, for instance, was stuck to a few people meeting in an upstairs room of a pub with a dog. And then suddenly they discovered, after the Second Intifada and after 9/11, that they were speaking to crowds of hundreds of thousands of people on occasions. That would propel you to think you might be onto something. So those people think they're riding the Islam bit. I would say that it's the other way around in that equation. But it's the sort of deal that gets done at this situation because people say, look, your society is unequal, you're not as loyal as you claim to be to your values, and your society is unfair. And of course the question you have to say or ask back is, compared to what? What are your alternatives? And every single alternative that's come up with on this is so radically worse that you can't allow it to pass for a moment. I would just throw one other one into the mix at this early stage. The intersectional answer, which is one of the more coherent, albeit, I mean, that's a damning statement in itself, of the theories that have been come up with in recent years. And this one, of course, says your society is unequal, and as a result, we have found this stratospheric version of justice, which if we can only operate it in the correct way, with the correct minority identity groups coming at the right speed and in the right location, we'll do that with our society and make it whole and pure and happy. And they seem not to realize that it's like coming in at that angle and it's just going to cause the most almighty pain and far, far more unhappiness than the system they claim to be critiquing. But that's just another of the ones that's coming in. It's because this inability to say compared to what.
It's interesting that you said that you used the word alternatives quite a lot. What's the alternative? Well, I mean, Angela Merkel literally said that there's no alternative for Germans to vote for. And what's the far-right party in Germany called?
Alternative for Deutschland.
Alternative for Deutschland. So when people are robbed of a sense that there is any alternative other than a moribund status quo, you get some nasty things emerging as that alternative. But let's follow up on that last point. And Sam, maybe you have some thoughts here, because I know that you're such a fan of identity politics. That's essentially what Douglas is talking about in terms of intersectionality.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about a story I heard. It's not on the identity politics point, but there's a story recently that I heard. I'm sure it was reported widely somewhere, but I just saw it in a series of tweets from the New York Times journalist Rukmini Callimachi, who's the New York Times.
Yeah, she's doing great work.
She's great. Most of what you might have read about ISIS, at least in the Times, has been covered by her. And she tweeted about this pair of cyclists, I forget where they came from, who were run over in, I think it was Tajikistan?
Tajikistan, yeah.
By someone who consciously had pledged affiliation to ISIS, and just saw in Tajikistan the way to run over an infidel is to see someone who's obviously a foreigner. And so apparently he had seen this couple riding their bicycles, clearly from some other country, and ran them over as an act of jihad. But what made this so poignant, and I think it encapsulates so much of what we're talking about here, is perhaps the most perfectly idealistic young couple on earth. They were riding, all over the globe as a conscious evocation of the philosophy that we just live in one world, and they're just good people everywhere, and if you just put yourself out there, you will find that people of every culture and every race and every background and every religion will want to host you and feed you, and they encountered a lot of that, perhaps almost all of that, until they didn't, right up to the moment they were run over by jihadists. And so you had the coincidence of the youthful Enlightenment idealism, we live in one world where all well-intentioned people of whatever background will find a way to have their values converge. And it's a safe world, and it's a world where you can, with confidence, just go out and not live in fear of difference, right? And all the while, they are putting themselves in a circumstance that's tailor-made to have their idealism shattered by, most horribly, not human evil, but bad ideas that are indistinguishable from the worst of human evil.